Would you all do me the honor of introducing yourself, Her Excellency, first?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Laila Suwaidi, DG of Federal Authority of Government Human Resources in UAE.
Good morning. My name is Fadi Ghandour. I am the managing partner of Wamda Capital, a venture fund investing across the MENA region.
Good morning. I'm Kreacic, Chief Knowledge Officer of Oliver Wyman Management Consulting, as well as the COO of the Oliver Wyman Forum, which is our think tank.
Great.
Lovely to be here today.
Welcome you all. So we're going to do this panel very conversational today. We're going to keep it talking between us rather than just direct questions. But the first question I think is on everybody's mind, and it was on my mind when I started to think about this. What is actually this gig economy that we're talking about, and how does it differ from traditional employment? Correct.
Well, when it comes to gig economy, we've noticed a lot of working options and types globally. And what we've seen in the latest years, that most of the employees are going to work, or are working actually in short-term contracts, either as freelancers or based on the projects based. So these are, we call them gig workers. It's not a full-time employees, it's a short time, and based on projects without benefits, or sometimes it comes with benefits.
Thank you. One of the key statistics, and Anna's been so great to help me, that I learned from our conversation was, now let's think about the Gen Z economy, the Gen Zers. What did we say? Over 40% already have a side hustle?
Yeah, it depends on the country. It's about 45% in the US. I think in the UAE, it's almost 50% of Gen Z workers here who have a side hustle. How many folks here have a Gen Z child? Right, so now just imagine 50% of them that are working between ages of 18 to 25 already in the side hustle world. It's fascinating.
It's fascinating.
So can I ask a question on that? So what does a side hustle mean? Does that mean you have a permanent job and you do work in your spare time? So it means you have your secure pay and you add extra work for time that you have in the evenings, etc. So which means is this the definition of gig economy, or are we working like Her Excellency said in tasks, in jobs, in projects? So two different things.
Yes.
So and there's a contradiction here. So
Yeah.
which means if you don't want to stay in your job a long time, that's one thing. Or if you're having your security sitting and earning a salary one place and taking advantage of your spare time and doing extra work. So these things need to be defined so that we are really knowing what are we talking about here.
So let's ask us that, because we're the panel. Is a side hustle and a gig the same?
I don't know what the research was about, but
It's both. I mean, it's people that are employed full-time, sometimes working on a side hustle. It's also what we would consider more traditional gig workers who have basically taken on a variety of different jobs that are not necessarily full-time and are not necessarily for one employer. They're choosing where to work, they're choosing how to work, they're choosing how long to work.
Okay, but whether it's a side hustle or a gig, there has to be benefits, right? And there has to be drawbacks. What do you think about the benefits?
Well, when it comes to part-time, it's a prorated benefits based. So basically, how many hours you are working based on the contracts, you will be paid for that. But when it comes as a freelancer, so basically you are assigned a task or a project that you have to deliver. And based on this output, you will be paid based on it. So mostly it's without benefits, just per the task or the project that was given to the person.
But beyond benefits, Anna, what are the other drawbacks?
I mean, I think benefits are a big issue these days, but I think the bigger drawback for me is coming back to the prior panel. You know, in many countries, we're dealing with labor laws that are almost 100 years old, you know, and they define work in 8 to 9 hour work days. And so I think there's a little bit of a mismatch between where the economies are moving to and the growth of the gig economy versus what we're doing on the policy and the framework side. Some countries are working pretty hard to catch up, but in a number of cases, you've had companies, large companies, you know, Facebook, now Meta, but a few years ago when it was Facebook, put in place policies to protect and provide a specific minimum wage to its contract employees. Unilever also had a U-Up program around that in terms of providing fairness on pay, fairness on benefits. But stability is a big issue, right? And to what extent people trust their employers. As we saw during COVID, lots of people lost their jobs. And that helped the growth of the gig economy because they moved into whatever they could find at the time. But that stability point and how we manage that workforce on an ongoing basis, I think, is a big question.
Fadi, let's double down on what she said. During the pandemic, it seems like this gig economy became a term. We started to, I mean, people had side hustles.
Even before that. So, I mean, the gig economy is Uber. Yeah. The Uberization of, that's how people thought of it. I mean, the discussion of the gig economy started way before the lockdown, right? So the lockdown got us into thinking about remote work. And that's not necessarily gig economy. I mean, so it's right. Remote work. You are basically having a full-time job, but working out of your wherever you want, as long as you have access to the internet and you have Zoom, and then you're in business, right? So I need to do that.
I got that.
But I want to ask a question here. And so the pandemic got people to lose faith in their companies. But I'm going to tell you that it's also the other way around. I mean, so companies are in the game here. So if we're going to talk about the gig economy as a project-based, no loyalty of employees in the Gen Z that want to do a job here and the job there and the job there, who's going to train them? Will companies be investing in people and then these people saying, thank you very much, I'm going to do this next job for someone else? I mean, that's a whole redefinition of our existence as people that actually do work to earn a living. And so we're not ready for that. We have not defined these things. They've been floating around. Labor laws are floating around. What do you do with government? Is government going to allow people to be gig workers? 50–60% of employees in the region are government employees. In some countries, it's 90% of employees. So how do you define gig work? Or are we saying it's remote work? And that's not gig work. Right. It's basically telling employees, do your job from your house. And I think that is essential. There is no turning back on remote work. There's no turning back. It's here to stay. But it produces all sorts of questions on trust. It also produces a question on learning and training. And it produces a question on the availability of infrastructure that allows you to be in remote work. So not everyone lives in Silicon Valley, and not everyone lives works in Meta, and not everyone lives in Dubai. Countries like where I come from, there is the availability of the internet was a big challenge when there was a lockdown. The cost of the internet is a big challenge. Who is to provide for those? Who is to provide for the infrastructure of the worker that is working remotely? Who will spend? Will companies be spending on your capability to be a remote worker? I haven't seen that defined. So do employees come with their laptop, or am I going to provide you with your laptop? I mean, basic questions, but they need to, there hasn't been any serious discussion from the private sector or the public sector on laws, on regulations that relate to the economy that is already here. What is happening is Gen Z is way ahead of us, and we're barely catching up to them. Sorry, I took too long, but...
No, but I love your last line about the Gen Zs. You're absolutely right. They're way ahead of us.
Yes, actually, I would like to add to Fadi. What we've done in 2019, we've conducted a study to understand millennials and Generation Z options of working. So what we found that 50% of young employees are more tending towards working remotely or working as a freelancers. They want to be more flexible, they need more autonomy, and they need to work anytime. They are focusing more on results and outputs rather than I need to be physically on this time, I need to communicate with a person, I need to sit with a supervisor. For them, it's about delivery. It's not about physical and communication issues. And when we went more level deeper, we found that 24% of them, they prefer to work with flexible teams, which means that they don't want employees to be in the offices. So they started working with freelancers. They started working with part-time employees, and some of them with hybrid employees. So definitely, I think it's nothing to do with the pandemic. It started earlier, especially when a generation and millennials access the market. It set a demand on us. So here we are. We need to understand that people are moving more towards the gig economy. Numbers are increasing. It's doubling. In US, it's reached to 36, and they're expecting to increase more, 20% in the next 5 years. In Japan, in Singapore, it's increasing too. So what we need to do about it, especially with all the technological changes happening around the world, the type of work also, it's not the same as it was earlier. Skill set required to work also, it's different. Regarding upskilling, reskilling, I guess all of us during the pandemic period, we all upskilled ourselves or reskilled ourselves in homes. We did not require a person to train us at that time, unless it was a supervisor or a speaker through Zooms or through any technologies were available at that time.
Great. Now, I know we've had many conversations about this, but during the pandemic, I think the gig worker, it came more prevalent. We heard about it more. And with the addition of the Gen Zs joining the workforce during the pandemic. And I know we've talked about, there are so many different statistics about where it's going. Maybe you can help us with some of those.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with what's been said. It really started with Uber and kind of the lawsuits, and that's when we heard it. But it accelerated during the pandemic. And I think during the pandemic gave people a chance to kind of reflect. They were sitting in their homes. They were doing remote work. Some were losing their jobs. The ones that were losing their jobs might have become gig workers elsewhere. Those that were sitting at home fundamentally started to reflect, is this how I want to spend my day? So if you're sitting for 8 hours, in a home desk that is not ideal for ergonomics, for how you work, for how we think, a lot of people started reprioritizing. And so when you think of an 8 or 9 or 10-hour day that's fully in front of a computer in a not optimized home workplace, you start realizing that that is not really how we were meant to work on a long time period. So you look at brain research, you're much more effective if you spend 45 minutes working and you take a 15-minute break, not going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. And so I think the flexibility that remote work offered people during the pandemic has had a lot of even non-Gen Zers reflecting on, is this exactly the way that I want to play it going forward? The challenge is that job security and everything that we know about traditional work is linked to traditional jobs, and you tend to work for one employer. So how do you move away from that? For me, one of the biggest challenges is the mismatch in priorities. So if you look at C-suite and you look at their priorities, the majority, 6 out of 10, according to the latest Mercer Global Trends, will say they want to prioritize, and they believe that the gig workforce will be a huge component of their future strategy. So whether that's gig or part-time or full-time, how do we think about the workforce holistically? But when you look at HR teams and the percent of HR teams that are prioritizing, thinking about the holistic workforce, thinking about gig workforce for the year, the number drops to half of that from the C-suite. So if we have this sort of misalignment, we're not going to be moving forward with whether it's a holistic solution for one employer in terms of how they manage a much more diverse workforce, or how we enable this future of work to actually evolve.
So Fadi, two things come up there: job security and job opportunities. So with the addition of now gig working, the normal employee, how is it going to look for job opportunities and risks?
No, you said normal employees?
Well, like,
what's a normal employee?
I'm a normal 40-hour employee. I'm not part-time, I'm full-time.
Full-time employee, how do they think about?
Well, no, now that this gig economy, what
Okay.
about my job security?
Yeah, good question. What about my job security? So I'll tell you, there's all sorts. I digress a bit, but I'll talk about women participation, for instance, in the economy. is the fact that work is going to home, going to encourage more women participation. And we need to not think of the first world. We need to think of emerging markets here, where women participation is much lower than it is in the rest of the world. What is going to happen now, and has it, I'd like to see studies, the fact that work is possible to be done remotely from your home. Are you building, are you starting as a woman, do you want to work? Because you might have conservative families that don't want to have their families going out and working in the public space. Are you able to have and build families now suddenly? That you are working from home, you can have kids and actually do the job? I mean, these are fundamental questions that we did not have to face before, because we used to say, oh, okay, she's got married, she's not gonna come back to work. I'm telling you, as a previous CEO of a big company, where I used to lose a lot of our top-notch, skilled women that wanted to have families and could not match work with that. So job security, back to your question, job security needs to be redefined completely today. Needs to be defined completely. I don't know what's the definition now, but it is something that is going to have Gen Zers think about their freedom versus their security. And so where's the balance here? Where's the balance here?
Right.
And so, and we're talking about, most of our discussion here is revolving around white-collar, high-skilled workers. Most of gig workers are not that. Yeah. True. Most of gig workers are driving cars. Yeah. You go to Saudi Arabia today, and being the age that I am, when you went to Saudi Arabia in the 80s and 90s, you would think that you would never find a Saudi, and we never thought that a Saudi is going to do blue-collar work or drive you from one place to another. Take an Uber in Saudi Arabia today, and most of the time, you're going to find a micro-entrepreneur. That's how he thinks of himself. He doesn't think of himself as a driver. He's a gig worker. He works in government. He has jobs in the morning, but he wants to earn an extra income, and he is going to be driving. And so this is redefining our even preconceived ideas about who we are in our countries culturally. So those things that we thought were culturally taboos were not true. Once the opportunity came up and once the income came with it, people will step up. In Jordan, in the old days, they used to say, not a single Jordanian will be working in a restaurant to serve. Once the demand for people to work in restaurants matched what you expect in salary, that job became available and the Jordanian woman or man would actually work. So again, this new labor thing that is happening in the world, gig or remote or whatever, has to be defined to what you earn in an income and how you define security as the person that is actually doing the job. You have to define it yourself. What does security mean? Does security mean that I'm going to earn for a year and then go have a vacation and enjoy and have nothing after that and start all over again? Again, it relates to families, marriage, whatever. These are things that society needs to address. It's not about the single act of a job. It is about society and even redefining cities. How will cities be defined if everybody is working at home? Is there a downtown then?
Excellent.
Where do you eat? Do you eat next door to where you live, or do you want to go eat at your work? Will you gain weight because you stay at home all the time? Will you have an issue of diabetes? I mean, these are things that need to be addressed. And so it's not about us doing just jobs. We're redefining our existence completely. During the pandemic, I learned how to cook. So.
Okay, I learned how to cook too. Okay.
I never thought I'd have that job.
I know we're short on time. I left them with 5 things to think about. I want you all to think about this for a second. What do you want the one thing for them to think about after they leave this session with us today? Whenever you're ready. I'm not going to...
I think the one thing that everyone needs to think about is that this thing is here, and the future is just starting here. So we need to accept it, absorb it, and start having a very serious dialogue among every participant in society about it.
The good thing about going first, right?
That is the good thing.
Okay. Her Excellency?
I think we need to focus on the big picture, because when it comes to job security or the technology impact, it's going to hit on everything. It's not about gig employees itself. So if we're talking about translator as a full-time job might be impacted because of the technological trends. Now, ChatGPT can do that very easily. Another tools can do that too. If he's a gig employee, he might line up with a lot of projects when it comes to the translation. But again, he might lose these projects when this technology comes in. So I think it's very important we need to look into the big picture and redefine the priorities and then set the policies based on it. We need to be agile enough to do so.
Great. Anna, help me end this.
I'm going to leave you with, I guess, three. One, repeating what Fadi said, I think this future is here now, and so I don't think we can delay at all. And I think actually in some ways we're late when we think about what needs to happen, both at an enterprise level as well as what needs to happen at a policy level to enable that future to be fair and sustainable for all. Two, we cannot think about this group as homogeneous, and we talked a little bit about that, right? Different people define job security in different ways. You know, we even find differences between men that do side hustles versus women, and you have a lot more women doing it for financial security reasons, and you have a lot more men going at it from a community, I'm an entrepreneur perspective reasons. And three, this kind of misalignment that exists right now between the C-suite in terms of prioritizing and investing in thinking about a holistic workforce, and especially gig workers, versus what HR teams are doing, versus to what extent have we actually equipped our managers to handle these different types of workers. We haven't even equipped them to fully handle remote and hybrid work yet, much less dealing with full-time, part-time, and various types of gig. And so, you know, these are complex problems. They're going to take years to resolve. So I think more focus is really needed right now.
Next year, we'll definitely have a session here about the gig economy again, right? I want to thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for your participation.
Thanks,